Some people plan their trips around lakes, some people plan around hikes, and some people absolutely love waterfalls. If that's you, this episode is for you. Banff is not usually known as a waterfall destination in the same way it's known for turquoise lakes, mountain views, and iconic hikes. But that doesn't mean waterfalls should be left off your itinerary. There are some excellent waterfalls right in Banff, a few easy ones you can add with almost no effort, and some truly spectacular waterfalls close enough to include if you're visiting Yoho, Kootenay, Jasper, Canmore, or Kananaskis. Before we get into the list, just know this isn't every waterfall in the Canadian Rockies. That would be a much longer episode. I'm focusing on the ones that either fit easily into a Banff area itinerary or are worth the extra effort if you're the kind of person who really loves waterfalls. So today we're talking about the best waterfalls near Banff, from easy scenic stops to short hikes and bigger waterfall adventures. Welcome back to the Banff Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Celine Brewer, a Canmore local and the person behind Travel Banff Canada and Banff Travel Planning. I help travelers turn their Banff wish list into a realistic Canadian Rockies itinerary without the overwhelm. And today's episode is for the waterfall people. You know who you are. You're the person who sees a waterfall icon on the map and immediately wants to know if it's worth the detour. You'll pull over for a roadside waterfall, add a short hike if there's a good waterfall at the end, and maybe even plan an entire day seeing one of the really spectacular ones. The challenge around Banff is that waterfalls are spread out. Some are right in town, some are along the Icefields Parkway, some are in Yoho or Kootenay, some are in Canmore and Kananaskis, and a few are worth adding if you're planning bigger hiking days. So instead of treating this like a checklist, I want to help you figure out where each waterfall fits. Because that's usually the most important question. Not, is this waterfall beautiful, but does this waterfall actually make sense for the day I'm planning? Let's start with the easiest waterfall to add if you're staying in Banff, Bow Falls. Bow Falls is right in the town of Banff. It's easy to visit by car, bike, or on foot, depending on where you're starting. It's not the tallest waterfall in the Rockies, it's not the most dramatic, but it is scenic, it's convenient, and it's very easy to work into a day around the town of Banff. If you're already visiting Surprise Corner, walking along the Bow River, exploring around the Banff Springs Hotel, or looking for something easy between bigger activities, Bow Falls is an easy one to add. Another waterfall worth mentioning close to the town of Banff is Cascade Falls. Cascade Falls you'll notice as you're driving the Trans-Canada Highway towards Banff or when you're visiting Cascade Ponds on Lake Minnewanka Scenic Drive. So, for most visitors, Cascade Falls is more of just a scenic backdrop than a planned hike, but it's worth knowing what you're looking at, especially if you're stopping at Cascade Ponds or you're doing that drive and you notice it up on Cascade Mountain. Now, of course, the most famous waterfall walk near Banff is Johnston Canyon. Johnston Canyon, as we all know, is busy. There's no way around that, but it's popular for a reason. You get the canyon walls, the catwalks, the rushing water, bridges, and waterfalls along the way. I always recommend visiting both lower falls and upper falls at Johnston Canyon. And of course, it fits well on a Bow Valley Parkway day or as its own half-day outing from Banff. Now, you've heard me say this before, but this is one to plan an early morning or evening excursion for. If you go middle of the day in peak summer, you're going to need to expect crowds, but if you can go early in the morning or later in the day, it's much more enjoyable. Now, another Bow Valley Parkway waterfall I really like is Silverton Falls. Silverton Falls is near Castle Junction. It's a shorter, quieter waterfall hike. It doesn't have the same dramatic canyon infrastructure as Johnston Canyon, but that's part of the appeal because it also doesn't have the crowds. So this one works well if you're already around Castle Junction or you're driving the Bow Valley Parkway or you've already done Johnston Canyon and you're looking for a less busy waterfall stop. Obviously not as iconic as Johnston Canyon, but it's a really nice option if you want something that feels a little bit more tucked away that involves some walking or hiking. Now, around Lake Louise, one waterfall that's easy to overlook is the small waterfall below Lake Agnes. Lake Agnes is obviously known for the tea house and the lake, not the waterfall. But shortly before you reach the tea house, there's a waterfall that adds to this experience. Now, I wouldn't hike Lake Agnes just for the waterfall, but if you're already doing Lake Agnes, it's a lovely part of that final approach to the tea house. And then, of course, once we get onto the Icefields Parkway, that waterfall list gets a lot better. The drive is already one of the most scenic drives in the world, but the waterfalls are part of what makes it feel more than just a way to get from Banff to Jasper. The easiest waterfall stop is obviously Tangle Creek Falls. Tangle Falls is right beside the road, so it's very simple to visit. You pull over into the parking lot, enjoy the falls, take your pictures, and then continue on your way. Now, Tangle Falls obviously falls in Jasper National Park. Before you get to that one, another roadside feature to watch for, still in Banff National Park, is the Weeping Wall. This one is especially good for early in the season, particularly in June when snowmelt is high and water is coming down the cliffs. Now, the Weeping Wall is not a hike, it's more of a dramatic roadside feature, but if you're driving the Icefields Parkway in very early summer, it's absolutely worth watching for. And then, of course, there's Bridal Veil Falls and Panther Falls near the Big Bend area. It's much easier to notice one from the road in that pullout area, and Panther Falls takes a bit more effort. It's a short walk, and it's a little less obvious than something like Tangle Falls or Bow Falls, but if you have the time, you might as well check it out. If you want a more of a hiking waterfall stop along the Icefields Parkway, Stanley Falls is one I definitely have on your radar. This is often done as the Beauty Creek to Stanley Falls hike, and it's not just one waterfall. You get a series of cascades and canyon-like scenery along Beauty Creek before reaching Stanley Falls. This one is especially good if you have some extra time on the Icefields Parkway. Maybe you haven't done a glacier adventure or the ice walk and you have some time to fit in a hike. Now, I will mention it, Bow Glacier Falls is another classic Icefields Parkway waterfall hike when it's open and accessible. So unfortunately, it's still closed due to a rock slide last June in 2025. You can see it from Bow Lake, but it's going to be very small and distant. Now, as your trip continues all the way towards Jasper, Athabasca Falls and Wapta Falls are two major waterfall stops that I would definitely prioritize. Athabasca Falls is powerful and easy to access and very impressive. You don't need a long visit for it to feel worthwhile. Wapta Falls is also easy to add, especially if you're driving towards Jasper. The upper falls are the main quick stop, and then there's additional walking options if you want to explore farther. Now, these obviously fit well into that Banff to Jasper travel day, the day you're exploring the Icefields Parkway, but you can also add them on to a Jasper sightseeing day. Athabasca Falls is only about a 30-minute drive from Jasper. All right, now moving back closer to Banff, Yoho National Park has some of the best waterfalls close to Banff. Obviously, the big one is Takakkaw Falls. If Yoho Valley Road is open during your visit, Takakkaw Falls is one of the most impressive, easy access waterfalls. Now, I'm recording this on June 12th, and the Yoho Valley Road just opened yesterday on June 11th. The walk from the parking lot is short and easy, and the scale of the waterfall is incredible. Now, there are two planning details to keep in mind, right? Yoho Valley Road, seasonal. So Takakkaw Falls is not a year-round stop. It's from roughly mid-June to mid-October. And of course, the road has a few tight switchbacks with some vehicle restrictions. So make sure it works for your vehicle before you go. Vehicles over 7 meters or 23 feet in length have to reverse in order to navigate around the tight switchbacks. And of course, there's no trailers allowed up there. Now, for most summer visitors with a regular vehicle, this is a great addition and you have no worries about getting up there. And of course, if you're already in Yoho, Emerald Lake and Natural Bridge fit really naturally into the same day. Now, Natural Bridge is not technically a waterfall, but it's a powerful water feature and a very easy stop on the way to Emerald Lake. So I still think it belongs in the conversation because most people visiting Yoho for waterfalls will probably enjoy it. So a really great Yoho sightseeing day could include Takakkaw Falls, Natural Bridge, and Emerald Lake. If you have the time and the energy and you want to hike to a waterfall in Yoho, definitely add Wapta Falls. Wapta Falls, not a quick roadside stop like Takakkaw Falls, but a very worthwhile hike. You get a big waterfall, a beautiful river setting, and a really nice hike to get there. Obviously, if you're a strong hiker and you want to add even more hiking to your itinerary, Yoho has some even bigger waterfall options. So Laughing Falls and Twin Falls are both accessed from the Takakkaw Falls parking lot. So obviously they depend on Yoho Valley Road being open, but also that there's no longer any avalanche danger in the Alpine. So they're definitely better for hikers who want a longer day or people planning a backpacking trip in the Yoho Valley. There are also waterfalls and cascades beyond Sherbrooke Lake on the route towards Niles Meadow. Sherbrooke Lake itself is a really beautiful lake with a moderate hike, but continuing beyond the lake moves into more rugged terrain. But then you have the waterfalls and cascades along Sherbrooke Creek. So that can be better for hikers who are prepared for a bigger outing. So not one of those easy waterfall stops. Moving over to Kootenay National Park, it sometimes gets left out of Banff itineraries, but if you're heading that direction, there's a couple of waterfall mentions worth knowing about. Numa Falls is the easiest one to add. It's along Highway 93 South in Kootenay National Park. It's a good stop if you're driving through Kootenay, visiting Marble Canyon, heading towards Radium, or just looking for a different scenic drive from Banff. This fits best on a Kootenay day, especially if you're already visiting Marble Canyon and Paint Pots, which I do recommend having in your itinerary if you have the time. I wouldn't drive into Kootenay only for Numa Falls, but if it's already part of your plan, then it's worth a stop. If you're looking for a hike in Kootenay National Park, Stanley Glacier is a really great one that is good to know about. The Stanley Glacier Trail is not usually described as a waterfall hike, but there are waterfalls and cascades along the route, especially when that snowmelt is strong. So in addition to a stunning hike, you get a waterfall bonus. Now let's talk about Canmore and Kananaskis. There are some excellent waterfall options here, especially if you're staying in Canmore or you want to spend some time outside of the busiest parts of Banff National Park. Troll Falls is probably the best family-friendly waterfall hike in Kananaskis. You can either go just to Troll Falls or you can also do an extension to Marmot Falls. It's a relatively easy trail, works well for families, casual hikers, or visitors who just want a simple half-day outing. So because of that, you can also expect this one to be busy. But Troll Falls really is a great addition to a day in the Kananaskis area. Closer to Canmore, Grassy Lakes, mainly known for its turquoise lakes. But there is also a waterfall along the more challenging interpretive trail. So that fits well on a Canmore day, especially if you want a short hike with lakes, views, and a waterfall along the more scenic route. One of my favorites, Karst Springs, is another Kananaskis hike that belongs on this list. Now, this one is different from a typical waterfall because the water actually comes out of the rock as a spring, and then it rushes downhill in a beautiful cascade. So obviously not a roadside stop. It takes more planning than something like Troll Falls, but it's really a beautiful option if you want something more unique. It's also a great group or family hike as most of it is along a nice wide trail. And of course, it's great for people staying in Canmore and who want to explore more of Kananaskis or looking for something beyond the usual Banff stops. Upper Kananaskis Lake also has waterfalls along the 15-kilometer lake trail. You can see both Sorel Falls and Lower Kananaskis Falls. Now, Sorel Falls is a shorter add-on from the Upper Kananaskis Lake day use area, while the full Upper Lake Loop is a much bigger hike, so you'll want to plan your day around that long hike. But that is how you'll see both the lake, stunning views, and both of those waterfalls. Another one to add is Ribbon Falls, another beautiful Kananaskis waterfall, but this one is definitely not a quick stop. It's more of a serious hike and often part of a bigger day hike or backpacking trip. It's absolutely worth knowing about if bigger hikes are your thing. Now, before we wrap up, there are also other hikes that include waterfalls that aren't the main feature. For example, Bourgeot Lake Trail. Most people do it for the Lake Harvey Pass or Mount Bourgeot, not specifically for the waterfall, but there's a really stunning waterfall along the forested approach before you reach Bourgeot Lake. Again, this isn't necessarily something I'd suggest for someone who wants easy waterfalls around Banff. But if your trip is very hiking focused and you want to see more waterfalls, then this is a good one to consider. Some waterfalls are a destination and some are just part of the experience on the way to something else. So just as a recap, if this is your first trip to Banff and you want easy waterfalls, start with Bow Falls. Johnston Canyon does involve some walking and past the lower falls does get a little steeper, but this is one that most people can do. If you want something quieter in the Bow Valley, you can look at Silverton Falls. If you're driving the Icefields Parkway, add Tangle Creek Falls, watch for the Weeping Wall, And consider that Stanley Falls if you want more of a hiking stop. Obviously, Bridal Veil Falls and Panther Falls also fit in that Big Bend area if you have the time. And then if you're continuing towards Jasper, Athabasca Falls and Wapta Falls are big ones to include. If you're doing Yoho, Takakkaw Falls is the standout when the road is open. Wapta Falls is one of my favorites if you're looking for more of a waterfall hike. And then obviously Natural Bridge on your way to Emerald Lake. If you're adding Kootenay, Numa Falls makes sense with Marble Canyon and the Paint Pots. If you want a great hike that involves some waterfalls, Stanley Glacier is a great one to add on. As I said, if you're staying in Canmore or adding Kananaskis, things to put on your list are Troll Falls, Grassy Lakes if you're going on the more difficult interpretive trail, Karst Springs if you want a longer outing, and then Upper Kananask Lake if you want an even bigger outing. If you're a strong hiker, maybe look into Ribbon Falls or Twin Falls, Laughing Falls, and even the waterfalls beyond Sherbrooke Lake. Now, before we finish up, a few practical tips as usual. First, you always want to check current trail conditions and road conditions. Waterfalls are often affected by seasonal roads or closures or rockfall hazards, snow, ice, mud, high water. So it's worth looking into before you go. Second, don't underestimate popular places just because they're busy. Johnston Canyon may be crowded, but it's still a mountain trail. You still want, proper shoes. You want to bring some layers and be prepared for changing conditions. Third, as always, you want to think about when you're visiting during the day. Early morning or later in the day is usually better for busy places like Johnston Canyon or Takakkaw Falls. For roadside stops on longer drives, you do want to build in some time for those stops so you're not rushing your entire day. Fourth, and this one is obvious, you don't want to climb around barriers or closed areas just for pictures. Waterfall areas can be slippery, unstable, dangerous, especially near rockfall zones or fast-moving water. And then not only for your safety, but we also do want to keep this area pristine for everybody else that's visiting it. I'll link to all of my related resources for these waterfalls in Yoho, Kootenay, Icefields Parkway, and Kananaskis in the show notes so you can keep planning from there. And if you're listening to this thinking, oh my God, I have so many places, but I'm still struggling to turn it into a realistic itinerary, that's exactly what I help with through my Banff travel consultations and inside the Banff and Jasper travel planning hub. Because most people don't need more ideas. You already have plenty of ideas. What you need is a plan and knowing how things fit together. So if you're just starting out inside the planning hub, you'll find my ready-made itineraries, planning resources, local tips, access to live Q&A sessions where you can ask about your specific trip. And many of the waterfalls I talk about in this episode are already worked into my itineraries, either as easy scenic stops, short hikes, or bigger add-ons depending on the route. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Banff Travel Podcast. If you got value from this episode, do me a favor and make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss the next one. It's free, it helps the show, and it keeps you in the loop. And if you have a question you'd like me to answer in a future episode, head to banfftravelplanning.com/podcast and send it in. Until next time, happy trip planning, and I'll see you out on the trails.